Welcome to the Coming Home Well podcast, the show that educates, supports, and advocates for the veteran community. Your host, Dr. Tyler Piron, U.S. Army retired, will bring you exciting conversations with amazing guests about resources, research, and military history, all geared to helping our warriors to come home well. Here's your host, Dr. Tyler Piron.
Welcome back to Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Tyler Piron, and today we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, education. But not just about getting your own education, but about being an educator. So we have Dr. Kim Moore, who has a doctorate in educational leadership and is a longtime veteran of the education environment, to come on and talk with us about why veterans make great educators. Kim, thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well.
Thank you, Tyler. I'm excited to be here tonight because we're going to talk about a subject that's dear and close to my heart.
So let's start at the very beginning. You've served in the military, and that's sort of been the foundation of your entire career afterwards. So what did you do? Where did you serve? Tell us all the deets.
Well, Tyler, I served for 20 years in the United States Army. My expertise is nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. So weapons of mass destruction. I was a chemical corps officer. During my career, I served in a variety of assignments to include being a basic training company commander, being a detachment commander, working at the home of the chemical corps, which was Fort McClellan, Alabama. But the majority of my time was serving at echelons above corps, where I served as the threat briefer for the SYNC in headquarters USARA. I also served as an exercise planning officer at CENTCOM. And then my last assignment was at the Pentagon, where I served as the branch chief for the chemical corps for Secretary of the Army and the Chief of the Army. And then I moved over to the Secretary of Defense's office, where I served in the negotiation department, where we worked on the Convention Against Chemical Warfare. And that's where I retired from, was from the Pentagon.
Boy, what a varied career. As soon as you mentioned Fort McClellan, it reminded me of going to basic training many years ago in that red clay that doesn't wash off. It gets stuck in everything. Your uniforms are ruined. I did not have it was a great time, but it was not a great time trying to get that clay off. Boy, that place has been closed a while.
It has been, and I was sad when it closed because it was the home of my branch. And I spent 3 years there as a young lieutenant, just having a great time.
So you served all over the world. You're an NBC officer. How in the world did you transition to being an educator? That doesn't seem to, it's not a natural flow to me.
Well, it's a very interesting story because one of my friends, a fellow chemical officer, we were lieutenants together, had gone to our training together at Fort McClellan. And throughout our careers, we were connected to each other. He retired prior to my time of retirement, and he became a teacher. And so when I retired, that transition from doing something for 20 years, especially something as structured as the military, can leave a person struggling and wondering who they are and what they are going to do with the rest of their life. I really didn't look at education. It wasn't something that was on my radar. I thought I would go into investment banking because I like to, spend people's money. I thought I might go into work for the Home Shopping Network because I love to shop. But none of those opportunities really felt like they were the right things for me to do. And my friend said, you should think about becoming a teacher. And I was like, why a teacher? He said, because if you think about the jobs that you've had, the ones you enjoyed the most, Kim, knowing you, it's always been around teaching and helping people achieve their potential. And I thought about it. He said, think about it. When you were a company commander, you loved being a company commander, helping civilians become soldiers. You were a platform instructor at the schoolhouse at Fort McClellan. You loved putting together, you wrote curriculum. Those were the best days according to you. So you should become a teacher. So I thought about it and I said, okay, I'll try. And got a job as a teacher. Originally had only planned to work for 15 years, retire again, and then go play golf, adjunct at the college level, and do leadership coaching was my plan. And I'm still here today, 20 years later, still in education.
You know, it's amazing when you think about it, because as you were talking about all those incidents and all those experiences, so much of the military is teaching. You know, whether you're a squad leader with a new squad instructing in individual and collective tasks, you're always teaching. It's so ingrained in the military that you're training and teaching. It's just so common. I didn't even really think of it as an educator in that way, but you're absolutely right. There's so much of it. It may not be in a formal classroom, but there's a lot of that as well.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Tyler. Think about what the military does. It invests a lot of time, a lot of resources in training us to be the best soldier, sailor, airman, airwoman, Marine, whatever branch you're serving in. But then as leaders, what are we tasked to do? To invest in the people we have the privilege to lead. And we are then teaching them. Sometimes it's on the spot, side by side, as we're correcting. But what I learned very early as a second lieutenant was from one of our instructors, and he said, you will fight like you train, therefore train correctly. Because when you're in the fight, that training is what kicks in, and that's what you do. Well, that's nothing more than educating, because you're educating the people that you're leading. And so it's a natural fit, which is why I believe veterans are a great resource for us in education to come into classrooms and be educators for our young people. They bring so much experience, diverse sets of skills on top of just different life experience. My military career gave me the opportunity to live across the United States, but also to live abroad, something that I probably never would have done if I had just gone straight into a different career field once I graduated from college. But the military gave me that opportunity. And now I get to share that opportunity with thousands of students. And hopefully, by sharing that with them, I encourage them to pursue their dreams.
You know, it's amazing. There's so many stereotypes of the military. It's all major pain, like the movie back in the days, or yelling and throwing things. And it's so far away from that. But the reality is there's so much education and training that goes on. And so much of it is college credits. And, you know, it's quite very, in many cases, it's more advanced than you could get anywhere else. And other times it's much more hands-on. So it's definitely the wide range. And I always tell people, if you join the military, just because you join the military doesn't mean like you're just marching all day. Everybody has a job, and it could be everything from being a cook to laundry and bath to leading an armor unit. It just depends on where you go. And so there's this broad range of things that you got to know. So what would you tell folks if they're getting out of the military, or they're kind of in a career rut after they've served, they're trying to figure out what they want to do? Why should they be an educator?
That is a great question. What I always tell people is, when I wore the uniform, I had the privilege to serve with the best people in the world. And I had the privilege to defend the freedoms of our nation. But as an educator, I get to shape and mold the future, because every career field starts in K-12 education. We're all products of the K-12 system. So if you want to change the future, if you want to have an impact where you can change not only the child's life that you're educating, but their children's lives, their community's life. That's the power of education. When a student walks across that stage with their high school diploma, we're giving them the key to unlock the gate of opportunity. And that's that feeling, as much as I loved my military career and was proud to serve and knew that what I was doing was adding value to society, as an educator, I'm doing even more.
So what does somebody need to do to get ready to be an educator? I only know it tangentially. You know, there's different certifications and different states have different rules. I was just reading a thing about how this test up in New York was really not a good test. And so they had this big lawsuit. And I know that if you're certified to teach in one state, you may not be able to teach in another state without passing a whole bunch of different rules or different policies or education. What is the best way to prepare to be a teacher if you're thinking about going along that path?
Okay, so if you are currently on active duty or serving in the reserves or National Guard, and you haven't finished your career yet, the first thing that you should do is look at how you're going to earn a 4-year degree, because you will need a 4-year degree. However, different states have put different policies and things in place. So what I would also suggest you do is wherever you plan to retire, or if you're exiting the military, wherever you plan to live, contact that state's education department and look at what are the requirements to become certified. For example, in the state of Florida, they just passed legislation where they have lowered the education requirement to a 2-year degree and with a 5-year temporary certificate. Now, why 5 years? Because you're required then to go on and finish your degree, get your 4-year degree, and in an area where you can be certified, take all of your tests. There's 3 tests in the state of Florida that you have to take, and then you become a teacher. But you can be working while you're going to school. I was fortunate that I had a 4-year degree because that was what was required to be an officer. And my 4-year degree was in science, biology with the minor in chemistry. So when I decided to become a teacher, I was able to get a temporary certificate in science. So my certification for teaching is chemistry, but I can always go back and add biology by taking the test to certify in that area. I'm alternatively certified. I'm not a traditionally trained educator. So I say that because I want people to know that you don't have to go back to school to get a 4-year degree to be a teacher. You can get a degree in a content area that you are passionate about. So it can be history, it could be science, it could be English. The key is to find out from the state, what do you need to do to be certified?
So each state has their own requirements. Go find out what they are. So every state requires a 4-year degree in something.
Yes.
And then something on top of that in addition for that particular subject, or no?
So you have to have your 4-year degree, and then you take a certification test called a subject area test. So that's where you will get your content. So if you want to be an elementary school teacher, you're going to take the elementary teaching certification. If you want to be a science teacher and teach chemistry, you're going to take the 6 through 12 chemistry test. Now, here's the other thing. Most states have a program called reciprocity. So I was certified in Florida. I'm now living in South Carolina. My Florida credentials, because of reciprocity, will transfer to South Carolina. So I don't have to take additional tests or additional classes because I already have my professional teaching certification. And that's the benefit of reciprocity. Now, states all do have different rules and requirements, and that's why it's very important to contact your state education department and ask them, what do you need to do? They are going to be more than happy to help you, because a lot of states across the nation are struggling to get teachers. There's a national teacher shortage. And one of the best resources out there are our veterans. I cannot emphasize that enough because we bring great skills. Not only do we make good employees because we know how to show up on time for work, we know we work hard, we do everything that we're supposed to do. But today's military is highly educated. Highly educated. It is not uncommon that our NCOs, our non-commissioned officers, have at least a 2-year degree. Most of them have a 4-year degree. And by the time they get to senior NCOs, a lot of them actually have a master's degree. So they're even higher, have more education than some of our classroom teachers.
So getting out of the military, or whether you're just doing an initial term or you're retiring, it really doesn't matter. We know that military people make awesome teachers just because of all the military experience and all the things that you mentioned. But what are some of the reasons that somebody might be hesitant about being a teacher? What are some of the challenges that they'd face?
Well, first and foremost, is getting through all of the hurdles to become a certified teacher. Second, it's that doubt of, well, I'm not traditionally trained. Do I have the skills to do that? Do I have the patience? Being a teacher is a lot of hard work. And like being in the military, you're not going to get rich being a teacher. Education is hard work. We do it because we love what we do and we want to help kids reach their full potential. And so walking into a classroom is very much like walking into basic training the first day. It's like, oh, what have I done? And what do I need to do? And this is really hard. But in the long run, it does pay off. And I just find that the veterans that are in education are some of the best teachers, the best employees that we have. Their commitment to excellence comes through in everything they do. But they also serve as great role models, because one of the things that we want to ensure that our students are ready for is not just college, career, but also service. I feel like as a nation, we've kind of gotten away from service, not just service in the military, but service as a civil servant. You know, every county has civil servants that do all of the work that we need to make our standard of living and the quality of life in our counties and in our cities. And young people don't always see that as a value, because you're not going to get rich, but you will get a sense of satisfaction that is just beyond having money. And I know that sounds very strange, but it's so true. That's what service does. And so I think our military people, I know when I talk to young people and they want to know, about my time in the military, they want to know, a lot of times the first thing they say is, well, how is it that you drive that car, that type of car? And I said, because every day that I wake up and do this, take a breath, I get paid. And the reason I do that is because I retired from the military. And with 20 years of service, now you can spend another 20 years doing something else that's great and fun that you love to do. But you know that you have made a contribution to our society through the act of service. So that's what I think also veterans bring to the classroom, is that ability to share those experiences and raise up the next generation of people who are going to serve this country and therefore serve us.
So one of the things that we talked about that I'm so curious is, how do you define, or how do you sort of expand on the leadership components of being in the military with being an educator? Because those are kind of different things, but I could totally see where you need to have control of a classroom or all the other things teachers do. And how do you merge that in?
It's what you just said, Tyler. So when I became a teacher, while I knew my content as far as being a scientist, I didn't necessarily know all the right ways to teach students, kids, but I also understood the value of structure And being a mother myself, I knew structure was important to my children at home. Therefore, my classroom was structured. I had expectations for my students. I had rules that we called norms for my students. I set the example and I trained them to do what it is that I needed to do. My class was a lab-based class. So we were in the lab at least twice a week doing experiments with flames and chemicals. So think about that. I taught ninth graders.
Boy, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
There you go. Ninth grade boys and fire. Not always the best combination, but never had an issue because it's using the same things that we did in the military to train our soldiers. The other beauty of leadership is I'm now out of the classroom, but I was an administrator. I was a high school principal. I used all of the leadership skills that I learned in the military. I've served at the district office. Once again, leadership. And now I'm serving in the role as a superintendent of a school district. Military leadership served as the foundation for that because everything rises and falls on leadership. It's what my mentor, John Maxwell, says. And that is so true. So all of the leadership skills that the military invested in me, trained me to do, I use all of those skills today. And I know that our veterans can do the same thing.
As you were talking, it reminded me of the basics that we learn in the military of task, condition, and standards. Here's what you need to do. Here's the standard by which it needs to pass, and here are the conditions in which it's going to be done. And it sounds, and I'm thinking back to all my time in classrooms, it's no different than having a syllabus and a code of conduct and
yes.
do the things. As I teach sometimes, I always ask, I get a lot of questions, and the answer 9 out of 10 times is, have you looked in the syllabus?
Yes.
And that's the conditions and the standards part.
You are absolutely right. But there's another area that the military prepares us for to be great educators. And that's the ability to deal with stress and to deal with difficult situations, right? So when I was a high school principal, my school was a shelter for hurricanes. And when Hurricane Irma came through in Florida, I had over 1,200 guests on my campus that I was providing shelter for. So that ability to think quickly in a crisis and to respond appropriately in a way that gets the job done is a skill we learn in the military. Because what do? We innovate, we adapt, and we overcome to that so that we can execute. That's what we do. And so they're just the skills that we learn touch so many different areas of being a great educator. And that's why I believe that our veterans can be the best teachers for our students today.
I think you're absolutely right. So let me ask you this. It's a 2-part question. What's the best part about being an educator, and what's the worst or most difficult part about being an educator?
Well, people used to ask me when I was a principal, wow, how could you be a high school principal? And I said, were you one of those students who spent a lot of time with the principal? Mm-hmm. And normally that was the case. The best part of the job is the kids. I love working with students. They are our future. The best part of being an educator is the first day of school when they come to school, and then the last day of school when they graduate and walk across that stage and you're sending them off into the world to do great and wonderful things. That is truly the best when you can see what your impact has been on a child's life. Because a lot of our students come in with a lot of trauma and a lot of difficulties. And to know that you really help that student achieve their goals, there's nothing better than that. Now, the most challenging part of the job is always the adults. It's never the students. Just like with soldiers, they're adults. And so it's like, let me take a different approach. And I can honestly say I work with some of the best people, but it's always the adults. It's never the students.
What an interesting perspective. I wouldn't have thought that, but when you say that, I think of all the overbearing parents in sports and all the things. I have kids. I don't see it a whole lot myself, but I've heard all these horror stories. And so that makes absolutely perfect sense. So we've asked a lot of things about, how to become a teacher. What's the best way? What are some of the challenges? But I'm sure there are things that I didn't ask. Is there something I should have asked you about, but didn't?
Oh, that is a great question, Tyler. So the one thing that I would say that you didn't ask me is why someone should pursue a career in education instead of going off and doing something else that will give them a much larger income than they would get by being a teacher. And I would say that the reason that you should be a teacher is truly because of the impact that you have. The ability to change a child's life, the ability to change their children's life. That is the power of a teacher. That is what we do every day in education, is that we change students' lives and we give them the skills that they need to be successful in their future career. So building upon that desire that you had to serve, which is why you joined the military to begin with, I would say take that same level of commitment and serve in a different capacity of being an educator. You will find that it is a rewarding, just as challenging as being in the military, just as much work as being in the military, but more rewarding than even serving in the military.
I would have thought it's a lot of challenge, but at the same time, you get plenty of time off when you're not in school, though that is shrinking. I've noticed the summers are getting shorter and less lengthy, and more schools are going to year round. And so there's a lot of change in the education environment, which is probably a good thing, keeping fresh and moving away from the agrarian schedule that we had back in the 1900s. And they, all the student drop off where, they finish one school year and have 2 or 3 months off. And what do you know? They forgot a lot of things, or those skills have atrophied. And so there's probably a lot of good discussions, a lot of good studies happening to see what is the most optimum way to engage students and keep them, engaged with learning, which is a challenge. And that's why we need great teachers like yourself and other folks that have served in the military, want to go and serve another career.
Yes. Well, that you're right, Tyler. But see, those changes that are taking place, as an educator, you can help shape those changes. You can shape the future. So we want to be purpose-driven and future-ready. That's the beauty of being an educator, is you get to help shape the future.
I think that is absolutely awesome. And it's a great career. As you talk to any teacher, it is definitely a sacrifice in a lot of ways, especially if you're a really good teacher. The best teachers I know put their heart and soul into what they're teaching. They know it. They love their kids. They love the topics, but it's a lot of work. I don't know any teacher that is just, they get home and they can totally tune out and not have extra things to do, whether it's grading things in the evenings or lesson plans or all the other things that teachers do. And so many are coaches and all these other things.
Yeah.
It's I don't know how they do it sometimes. I just keep track of, man, that person is doing this, and this. And somehow they do it all. But it is definitely a self-fulfilling prophecy of helping kids become adults, become great members of our society, whether they're going to go to college or in a trade or in the military, wherever their path leads them. And sometimes to all three, you never know.
Yes.
Kids are amazing. I do think back to my own teachers back even in high school, the ones that said, yeah, you should definitely join the military. Yeah, college isn't for you. No, I'm just kidding. But I was ready to leave. I was, put a lot of effort in high school, but I was done at the time. And then years later, I do all these other things because I had that good foundation, just like you were talking about at the very beginning. Kim, thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well. If somebody is interested to learning more about what you do and how you do it, I know you've got a new job, but we won't talk about that. But you do have a website and a ton of podcasts where you talk about becoming an educator, being an educator, and a bunch of those. Why don't you share your website and so that folks can go and reach out if they have more questions?
Oh, thank you, Tyler. I would love to do that. It's kimdmoore.com. And when you go there, I have a wonderful ebook that you can have when you sign up. I'm not one of those people that bombard you with tons of email, but I do a weekly blog post as well as a weekly podcast. And so I would love to have everyone follow me because I do share lots of wonderful tips on how to be a much more effective leader, as well as educational information to help you understand what we're doing in the field of education and hopefully encourage you to join us.
Well, folks, go check out the website. It's really cool. I've listened to a bunch of her podcasts. I learned a bunch of things. So if you're at all interested in becoming an educator, it's a great resource. You can definitely reach out and contact Dr. Moore and say, hey, I'm trying to transition and I want to know about this. Because sometimes we don't know a teacher, especially if we've served in the military, we've been all over the world. And sometimes, and this is just like a by the by, the DoD also has tons of teachers in all the same places that we have kids, the DoDEA, and they are always looking for teachers as well. So if you want to sort of stay around the military, but not be in the military, that's a great option. So there's a lot of places and there's a lot of school districts around the country. Almost all of them are looking for teachers. Salaries are starting to sort of recognize the significant education and time commitments that teachers give us. Not everywhere, not all the time, but I think the investments are definitely worth it. But, each school district is doing their own thing. So, folks, go check it out. Go to Kim, D as in dog, Moore with 2 O's. Super easy, and we'll put it in the show notes. So you don't have to write it down if you're driving or something like that. Dr. Morse, thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well and sharing with us, your love of education, but also how veterans can make some great educators.
Thank you, Tyler. It's been my privilege.
Thanks for joining us this week on Coming Home Well with Dr. Tyler Piron. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. Thanks again. And until all are home and all are well, this is Coming Home Well.